I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over, and Rachel Eliza Griffiths has been on my radar for a while as a poet and a visual artist. I mean, her photographs, well, we'll go there, but you probably know her byline from Seeing the Body, which is a poetry collection from 2020. It was an NAACP Image Award finalist. And Edwige Dandicott loves this book, and Nick Flynn, the poet, loves this book. And it is a mix of poetry and visual images that really is quite spectacular. There's a new memoir called The Flower Bearers, and this book is so in conversation with Seeing the Body. There are also four other collections of poetry and a novel called called Promise, which is set in Maine. But I think mostly we're going to look at Flower Bearers and Seeing the Body in this conversation. And I'm so excited to see you. This is so, I've been looking forward to this conversation. Can we start, though, with Flower Bearers? Because you did start writing this roughly in 2020. Do I have that right?
Flower Bearers, I began to write actually kind of in like 2022,
Okay.
2023. Seeing
Okay.
the Body, I wrote in 2020. So Seeing the
Okay.
Body, as you were saying, is kind of I don't know, the prequel to the Flower Bearers.
The poems in Seeing the Body are they're really magnificent. And they're centered on your mother who died in 2014.
Yes.
So 2014, and it's a mix of sort of longer work, shorter work, the photographs. How did it all come together? Because I mean, if you've been working on this for a while, right? You've
Mhm.
studied poetry for a very long time. This book feels so organic. The collection feels like it has all of the beats where you expect them to be. There's some references to Toni Morrison and Gwendolyn Brooks and all sorts of your background in this book, but especially your mom is the biggest thread running through it.
Thank you so much, Miwa. I'm so happy to be talking to you. And the Seeing the Body, it came from grief, and
Mm-hmm.
it does connect the Flower Bearers, the memoir, with grief,
Mm-hmm.
more grief. But I think the Seeing the Body came out in many ways as a kind of alignment of grief and grieving, but also in the grief celebrating.
Mm-hmm.
The poems are really raw, and that tends to be my foundation, is wanting things to be raw, to be organic, to not be polished. The polishing comes later in revising, but the kind of hole in my body is a place that I have often tried to feel with language, with art, when I can't even reach language. My mother was an amazing person, and I needed to, in some way, with Seeing the Body, bring different parts of my identity as a visual artist, as a poet, as a daughter, as a
Mm-hmm.
sister, as a friend, all together. And so Seeing the Body was the first experiment for me, really, of bringing my visual identity, my visual voice towards my poetic voice.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd call myself a lyric poet, and I think I'm also a lyric photographer. So my photographs they're always centered on the body, usually my body, because I mostly work in self-portraiture. But with Seeing the Body, the photographs that are gathered in that book, I think I was most taken with seeing my mother in my body. There's so many of the images where I'm like, there's her wrist, there's her
Mm-hmm.
finger, there's her, cheekbone, and bringing us both together in that work. And so Seeing the Body allowed me to continue to listen and reach and
Mm-hmm.
question and celebrate my mother's life, but also realize in that book I fundamentally changed. A huge part of my life was now gone, and so there was a
Mm-hmm.
great grief of I'm never going to be the same. And that kind of grief is very different than just the loss of a loved one externally, but the death of a self and a rebirth and transformation
Mm-hmm.
of a self. And then how do you make that in art if you ever can? Those are some of the things I think with Seeing the Body, that the poems came into the rhythm. They really showed me a path because I was pretty skinless and raw and gutted. And I just needed to kind of listen and listen and listen and go back in memory and narrative. So, you know, Seeing the Body, even now, I feel like the poems are going out still to other people who are grieving.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't need the poems the way I did when I wrote them, The
Yeah.
poems almost feel bigger than me. They're for other people. And the
Hmm.
letters and feedback I get from people of putting lines of the poems on headstones. Parts of these poems have now been tattooed on people's bodies I'll never meet. People
Hmm.
share their stories. Their grandmother's in hospice, their mother is in chemo, their sister, just got bad news. And I love sharing stories and seeing the body let me share stories of my mother and myself all at once.
One of the things I love too about the photographs that are included in seeing the body is the landscape shifts. Are you in Arches or Bryce Canyon when you're some of the outside desert photos? I was like, I know you're in the Southwest somewhere, but I don't know exactly where. But then some are internal in a living room kind of thing. It's that broad range of space, but also how you contort to fit the space. And in some places, we're clearly outside in the South. It's very lush. Even though the photos are in black and white, you can sort of tell where we are because you're playing with shadow and light the way you do with language in the poems. The visual imagery really is aligned. And I'm wondering if one art form represents your voice more than the other, or if you need both to be able to interpret the world for yourself.
Hmm. These days, I feel I need both. I feel when I was a younger poet, a younger visual artist, I felt like I had to choose and I had to keep these boxes of the
Hmm.
visual artist is over here, the poet is over here, the novelist is in
Right.
neither of these boxes. That's a different
Right.
kind of scaffolding. But now I let them bleed and melt into each other. They do need each other. They probably always did, but I
Hmm.
wasn't developed enough or felt my voice was there to trust the kind of unconscious, subconscious relationship
Mm.
that they do have with each other. But I really couldn't choose one or the other. And I think it depends on what the material is. I think they're also good for showing me how to fail sometimes. Like I might have something in a poem and I'm pushing it. And then I'm like, you know what? This is not working. Why don't you go out and go shoot, go make some images for a while and let this thing that you're trying to just force this language onto, let it show you, listen for it, stop it, leave it alone. And it's hard to do that because you want to control it and you want to wrestle it. But kind of surrender is also surrender, risk, this daring aspect
Hmm.
is really essential for me. I have to feel like everything's at stake with every poem, with every image. You get to know your body as a photographer. I'm a very physical photographer.
Hmm.
And I love what you said about being in these different geographies, because particularly for seeing the body, that was the grief. I carried it, it was a map. I carried
Hmm.
it into all of these places. So I carried it into Abiquiu and just outside of Santa Fe.
Oh,
I
that's where.
carried it,
Okay. All right.
and I
That-
love that Georgia O'Keeffe painted this exact
Yep.
image, this landscape.
Yep.
She painted it often, actually. I think it's called Plazas Blancas.
Hmm.
But it's beautiful, but also it feels like a different world. It's all
Hmm.
white volcanic rock.
Hmm.
And the image for the cover of Seeing the Body, that was the 1 year anniversary of my mother's death. I
Oh,
did not
wow.
know who I was. I was climbing up into the rocks.
Hmm.
Natalie Diaz was my photo assistant that day. I was like, don't let me die. My tripod was on the ground. I was crying, I'm coated in filth. And I was like, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. This is where my grace is. And so for many of the photos, even the interiors, like I'm
Hmm.
inside a piece of furniture at Yaddo.
Right.
So I was at Yaddo and I'm like, why am I at a writer's colony when I am just a feral little creature? I don't know what I'm.
Right.
I'm not a writer anymore. I'm not a poet. I'm not anything.
Hmm.
So then I'm like, well, I can make an image of that. I can try to do that because I wrote nothing at Yaddo. I just kind
Right.
of wondered who I was and what was happening to me. That was best approached by camera, of
Right.
not having to explain and I just wanting my camera to witness me.
Hmm. There's a great line. One of the early poems in Seeing the Body is called Chronology. And there's a great line you have, which means language is neither innocent or free. And I'm taking that entirely out of context. But the line itself holds, it absolutely holds. And I love the idea, listening to you riff on the photographs, really does make me think of this line, because how do we find the language to describe the physical experience of a thing, right? Like grief and grief memoirs. We're going to get to your grief memoir, but they work, and people find comfort in them, and people gravitate there is a reason that there is a body of grief memoir that you can find in any bookstore, in any library. Like, there, there's a book for everything, right? And the idea that language is going to get us where we need to go, but yet there's still a price for it. Mm-hmm. Even when we know where we want to go and what we're trying to do, language can be hard. It doesn't always get us what we want and how we want. And I will say, having read The Flower Bearers now a couple of times, it is very intense, very satisfying. It is big-hearted. It is in places hard to read, genuinely, for all of the reasons one would expect when we're talking about grief. But I'm wondering how it feels for you to have this out in the world. I mean, there's a lot in this book that I know your friends knew, I knew your spouse knew, but, now anyone who picks it up is going to know.
I actually am enjoying allowing myself to be vulnerable. I've had a kind of existence being very polished and shielded and concealed and hidden away. And when you hide long enough, you can hide from yourself. And so I feel, this thing of trying to get the language, reading other memoirs, knowing first and foremost, you're not alone. I think that's something with The Flower Bearers for me, that even as I was writing The Flower Bearers, more loved ones of mine were dying for different reasons. Friends were dying, people in our cultural, in our world, huge figures, smaller figures, sad stories were arriving and arriving. So I thought, my memoir is part of a greater story. It's a brick in a bridge that is a very human bridge that we all, to be human, have to grieve. And that the scale of that can be really funny. It can be devastating. It can be an ordinary thing of something you just miss. And it can be really internal about yourself and things about your childhood. It could be anything. And so, I think there's also that way that you feel when you hear other people's stories, and maybe they help you and you can't even tell them how they've helped you. But I hope that is one of the things with The Flower Bearers. But I think I've always been fascinated with the kind of elegiac and the grief and wanting to remember and speak the names of people who are no longer with us. And I think that's also my obsession with memory, which also ties into photographs, because photographs are visible relics of memory, of history, of evidence, of bodies, of people that existed, whose names or stories we may not never know, but we might have an image of a smile or someone's eyes or a person leaning against the wall smoking a cigarette. I guess people don't do that as much anymore. But I'm just, for me, and I couldn't imagine sitting here and speaking to you about it. I never imagined I could be the woman I am now. And I know that this book has not offered me closure on my complex trauma disorder, but it has allowed me as an artist to show up for myself, show up for the person in the memoir, show up for the daughter who grieves and seeing the body, and be there and hold space for her. I think one of the best parts of The Flower Bearers is just, it feels like I've just come out. No one can shame me. I don't feel shame. I've had quite a few decades of just constantly, as the eldest daughter, the parentified child, I shame, but also seeing the intergenerational effects of shame, the shame my mother felt, the shame that I have to say when people are really grieving and they are not on everyone's timeline, you feel ashamed of yourself. Why can't you get it together? Why can't you just let it go? Why are you the person who makes everyone uncomfortable because you can't be anything but yourself, or you can't hide the pain you're in? And for the last few years, the shame I felt about what had happened to me, it wasn't really logical for me to feel shame. I didn't want to make other people feel uncomfortable. I
Mm-hmm.
was still in my like Oscar award-winning role of people pleaser.
Right.
And for me to survive what's in the flower bearers and what has happened to me since, I had to really put some stuff down and just
Right.
say, I don't know how much time I have here, but I'm going to do what I want to do. But I also just feel me like, I'm good.
Yeah.
I care. I care
Yeah.
so much about so many things.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't be guilted or shamed. I can only say what my version of my life has been, and that's my voice on my terms. And thank goodness I'm not at the end of my life to realize that I do have a voice and that, my story is something I'm offering
Mm.
to myself, but to others as well.
And The Flower Bearers is also the story of a very deep friendship you had with a friend that you met at Sarah Lawrence. And Aisha is a huge part of the story. And you have this great line. In New York, we were outlaw women when we chose to be, but at home we reprised our roles and recurring roles, sorry, sometimes sealed and confining as adult daughters. And I love the idea, and it might have a little bit of identification with that, where we get to be sort of, and listen, I love my family. They are who they are. Family is complicated. But when you're young and you're figuring out what your voice actually is and how much of it is yours, and where art fits into that, and where friendship fits into that, it's really kind of liberating. But the factory presets run pretty strong. And so you get home and you're like, oh, right, flip the switch. This is what we do and how we do it, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about when you met Aisha and because you kind of clicked immediately, it sounds like.
It was immediate. And, when you talk about family and how complicated it is, my family is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I love
Mm-hmm.
my family. And then there's a chosen family. There is a family as you're becoming who you are.
Mm-hmm.
These individuals come into your constellation and shine with you. And seeing the body, there's this poem, Chosen Family, that,
Yeah.
as I was coming through writing that book, I just thought there's a greater family that I get to choose, but
Mm-hmm.
I've been fortunate to have a beautiful family. And when I walked into this library at Sarah Lawrence College and saw this incredible woman sitting there, and she looked up, and it was like, it was just so immediate.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was that thing when you find a friend,
Yeah.
particularly between women, and you
Mm-hmm.
just know that you're going to get to age and live and have your adventures and be in this kind of unconditional space of
Yep.
acceptance. I'd never had that before. And so I was
Mm-hmm.
like, oh my gosh, I've got a grown up friend. I've met her. She's a writer, she's an incredible poet.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to be on this journey together. We're going to come of age in New York. We're going to be dancing and eating and dreaming and writing our poems and going to see our heroes read,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of make this story of ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
being who we were. She was absolutely stunning as a person. And her ways of being taught me so much. They made me a better person. I was very lonely. I had a lot of mental health trouble. I don't think my family understood me
Mm-hmm.
as the kind of quirky, awkward, melancholy elder Black girl daughter in a middle class Black family where people are usually lawyers or doctors, full stop. And I'm showing up like, where's the typewriter? I was like, who are
Mm-hmm.
you? But when I met her, and I think you know this feeling, and I don't have to explain, it was incredible. And so one of the things that brought me great joy in the flower bearers to write it, and even now to speak about it, I get to speak her name. I get to
Mm-hmm.
say that her name means love. I get
Mm-hmm.
to remember moments and giggle and chuckle. And the grief too, that a part of me when she was alive and here,
Mm-hmm.
I don't get that anymore except in memory. I only laughed a certain way with Aisha, and I miss
Mm-hmm.
that. But at least I had that for 17 years.
Yep.
And so I talk to her all the time. Her poems, she came into the room with a kind of presence, very quiet, but you knew
Mm-hmm.
she was there. And we would just laugh We would listen to each other. We were phone marathon buddies on the phone all night. We loved old school hip hop and R&B. We went to go hear jazz at Blue Note. We could
Hmm.
talk our way, into any kind of back room in our poet
Hmm.
mode because we were just this curiosity.
Yeah.
And so, she had this musical index because she was from Nashville. And so everything was music with us. And so
Hmm.
one of the things too, the playlist I would play as
Yeah.
working on the book, I would turn things on and just be like, oh wow, Minnie Riperton comes on, it's Aisha, Stevie Wonder, it's Aisha, it's my mom, it's how I grew up, it's what
Hmm.
raised me. And so I feel that my sisterhood with Aisha helped raise me as a poet. It helped, we were mothers to each other in a way,
Right. Right.
and sisters, chosen sisters.
One of the things I love about the Flower Bears is the way you capture the sort of sense of possibility and discovery and serendipity that New York used to have more of. And I came back to New York a while before you did. And I was explaining this to some younger folks recently where I was like, no, you don't understand. Like, we never knew where the night was going to take us. We had no idea. Like, now life is a little more siloed. But I mean, I have some stories that I'm not going to tell here where you end up in somebody's place and you're like, I don't even know how this happened, but this is great. More of this, please. Right. And you just ended up sort of running in this weird fluid pack. And like you would see someone here, you would see someone there, and you wouldn't necessarily talk to them later, but like you just sort of knew who everyone was. And we
Mhm.
all just sort of moved in this giant, well, fluid pack. It's very hard to describe, but it's also, I think, really hard to replicate. I don't know if it's possible to replicate it.
I mean, I feel like when I was a younger poet, there were just packs of poets, and
Yeah.
there was an ecosystem, there was a way. I feel like there's certain poets when I was coming up, I never
Mm-hmm.
saw them in daylight. I only saw them like, you're like a 2 a.m. to 7 a.m. poet that
Yep.
I see. Or, we go to KGB here, we go to
Mm-hmm.
Cornelia Street, which no longer exists.
Oh,
We go
yeah.
to Mesro, we go here. This is where we go for happy hour in Brooklyn. This is where we go get the half price
Right.
oysters. This is where we go, for an open mic set. Let's go to Louder Arts. And there were just, circles of groups where, the next day, the recap, if you remembered
Right.
all of it, was
Mm,
epic. And it would just kept you open of
right.
what could be possible. It wasn't virtual. It was
Yeah.
all bring your body, get on the
Mm-hmm.
dance floor, go to the diner at 3 a.m. and have
Mm-hmm.
blueberry pancakes. And,
Mm-hmm.
there was just this kind of open thing that happened. And I know for me, I always like to read accounts of, Keith Haring and Basquiat
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
Francesco Clemente and what were they doing and where were all the Joan Mitchell and de Kooning, where were
Mm-hmm.
all the painters painting and where would they get together
Mm-hmm.
and where was there's this cycle. And I sometimes wonder now, how does that happen now, because it does seem more virtual, more siloed. There's just more anxiety in
Mm-hmm.
a way that I'd be like, well, I'll figure this out. Okay, I want to have a great night. I've got about $24 and the F
Mm-hmm.
train is brutal at this time. You know, is the F train have construction? Because that's going to affect,
Right.
how deep I go into Brooklyn or how I get into Harlem or whatever else or what's on my Metro card or, it was all those things. They just retired Metro cards. And I'm just like,
What I'm
okay,
still I'm still having a moment, but I have become one of those people who's like, well, at least I have my phone in my pocket. I can just swipe myself in using my phone. That's a little too weird. That's a little too sci-fi. Like, how am I doing? It's just, but it's easy. But you're talking about community. I mean, everything that you had with Aisha, your friendship, your sisterhood, your shared love of poetry, your shared craft, community is the thing. Like, that's where the memory runs deepest for me, is just maybe I didn't know your last name, but like we knew enough about each other to have a conversation kind of thing. And you could go and be part of a thing, but yes, you had to show up physically.
I had to show
And
up.
it really was kind of, as you described it, like a run of places. And yeah, KGB was on there, and like there were reading series every, and it's not to say that there aren't reading series now, but it was just, it was, yeah, it was It was beyond vibrant. I'm not even sure I have the words to describe it anymore because it just feels like it was a million years ago. And then there were, of course, the clubs where people had keys to get in and all of that weirdness too. And it's just the evolution of New York
Mhm,
and
mhm,
all of the changes that we've seen.
mhm.
But
I mean,
you,
even just the kind of, money issue of how you
yeah,
can go out in New York at
yeah,
night or do things like,
hmm
rent and where
yeah,
poets lived and how many poets can you fit in like
hmm
certain neighborhoods in Brooklyn where they're completely priced out now.
yeah,
Most people are, all the condos and things everywhere. And it's also this thing that you realize about the city is that, she changes her clothes, she changes her skin,
yeah,
she puts on a different lace front and keeps it moving.
hmm
But I look forward to, because I know
yeah,
there will be more of us writing about what this time was like. And
hmm
so I just didn't want to forget who I was, my oversized tote bag filled with zines, CDs,
hmm hmm
albums. I would be schlepping
hmm
around my stuff. I'd have like um this thing Aisha and I used to call our hoe bag, which would have like a brush. We call it our hoe bag. It'd have like a toothbrush. It would
hmm
have, like some wipes, some eye drops, because you
hmm
might have to show up and be like teaching your class in the morning and you
hmm
come from the late night jam session in someone's
hmm
living room and you've got papers to grade on the train and be
hmm
ready. It's just all of those kinds of things that it also, it connects you to who came before you.
Right,
And I think,
right.
my bedtime is very early now. It's very early, and like I want to save my knees. So, I'm not out on the dance floor cutting up just in memory, but
hmm
it was just wonderful. And in the moments you were in it, you knew it was wonderful. And then there were the nights where you're like, there must be something else. How am I going to
Yeah.
make it? And so that kind of, gorgeous dissonance, that kind of
hmm
dance where a step forward, three steps back. Oh,
hmm
I just got a poem accepted. I got $50, y'all. Where are we going? Like you
Right.
have that thing, and everyone would celebrate you. Hey, you got a poem published? We're all going here.
hmm
Oysters, someone's helping someone else. And then moments where, too, a friend is having a hard time in community.
hmm
What does that brother need? What does that sister need? Can someone
Right.
check in? And that to me was just beautiful and different if I had maybe been by myself or been alone
hmm
or just not maybe rooted
hmm
um, into a space. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to get to New York, to get
hmm
to Sarah Lawrence. How
Yeah.
do you live
Right.
if you know that all you want to do is write stories and make art and share it and listen to other people? What is the living cost? What's the price of that?
And the price comes in so many forms. I mean, when you think about grief and you think about memory, and I mean, part of the value of grief comes from knowing that there's something on the flip side of it, right? That there is joy, that there is the unexpected, you talk about grief as being something that would not leave you alone. Like you couldn't shake it. And there are a couple of different moments where you were like, it would be fine if grief decided to leave me alone, but it's never going to happen. And that's one of the best descriptions I can think of because it was like you were saying earlier, it's like, well, I felt like I should be able to move through this. I felt like I should be able to change my approach. And it's like, well, actually, that's kind of not how grief works. And it is a wildly unpredictable, uncontrollable, it's, I thought when my mother died, I thought, oh, great, I'll just make a lot of lists, I'll manage through this, all of this kind of thing, right? And that's exactly not what happened. That is
No, no,
absolutely the
no, no,
last thing
no,
that happened.
no, no,
And,
no.
and, but especially too, as women, we're sort of taught that we can manage everything, right? Like you can do all of the things at once. And of course, the eldest daughter thing, like, it's a cliche for a reason. And looking back on it now, I'm just like, well, we survived. That's great. Okay, now we move on. It doesn't change the memories I have. It doesn't change my experience of my mother, but I can certainly laugh at it now in a way that I was not laughing at it in the moment.
No
It was
laughs.
not
Not
funny in the moment.
funny. It's not funny. No. And For me, I was maybe 11,
Hmm.
I think 11 or 12 when my mother was diagnosed with this kind of
Right.
kidney failure, and she
Hmm.
was on the list for this organ. And my whole kind of childhood and adolescence was organized around my mother's body and her health, and going to hospitals for weeks or months,
Right.
and having to go to school, get dinner ready, clean the house, and kind of also deal with incredible anxiety and fear that she's in the hospital, but she might not come home. And so
Right.
it made a very almost forced or inflicted a kind of hyper maturity,
Yeah.
because I really had adult responsibilities. Like, it was like, what childhood? Even
Mm.
though my mother was like, I want you to be a child for as
Hmm.
long as you
Hmm.
can, but that just wasn't available to be a child.
Right.
It was like a little person in a smaller body, like an adult.
Hmm.
And so it also, though, I think for me, it taught me, although it's not really teach, I don't, the lesson thing and the whole, what's the lesson?
Hmm.
I'm not as attached to that as I used to be, because I needed that to survive,
Hmm.
but not to take things for granted, to be present in the moment
Hmm.
for what's at stake, and to not know what's coming. But, growing up, witnessing your mother of all people
Hmm.
fighting for her life, to see her
Hmm.
children grow up. And she would say that all the time. My life is shorter than most. I'm not going to be here. We have
Hmm.
to like figure this out for you. I want
Hmm.
you to be a good person. I'll try to live as long as I can to see that, but I may not. That's
Hmm.
heavy stuff to put
Yeah.
a child. Um, and if you already have an artistic personality, which I did, it just meant a lot of melancholy and early depression, early anxiety, and a
Hmm.
very immediate kind of close relationship with mortality.
Right.
It wasn't ever far off death. It was like, oh, we've got to go to the hospital, or oh, the blood pressure is off the charts. I know what this means. Oh, let me help with the dialysis procedure that she does
Hmm.
at home,
Hmm.
and put on mask, and people are coming over and I'm giving them a surgical mask.
Right.
Kids are like, this is weird. Your house is
Right.
weird. And I'm like, well, it's normalized for me. This
Right.
means my mom's alive.
Hmm. Hmm.
So these are some of the things, it's complicated.
Mm.
It's complicated. Sometimes I felt like I was my mother's mother. Sometimes we were
Mm.
sisters.
Mm.
Sometimes she made it clear that I was the daughter and she was the
Yeah.
mother. And there's a richness now. There are, some moments in the Flower Bearers that showed really different parts of her personality
Hmm.
that I wasn't ready in seeing the body. It was so immediate, the grief was so intense. I was in the lateral stage of just trying to get
Hmm.
forward.
Hmm.
But now in the Flower Bearers, it's nonlinear.
Yeah.
It's circular. It's atmospheric, where my mother is much more fleshed out of how she
Hmm.
really was. But she is also the mother and seeing the body as well. And I'm the daughter, and I'm also the poet. So this all interests me so much. I'm sure it will
Hmm.
always be with me, because she's always going to be with me.
That, and also I'm thinking about Good Food, which is one of the poems, and seeing the body. And there's a little more bounce and a little more play in that particular poem, because you're
Mhm.
like, well, my mother taught me it. I'm paraphrasing you, but it's like my mother taught me how to not only feed myself, but also remember that there is joy in doing these things. And like you actually, and then it becomes a much more complicated metaphor about feeding yourself emotionally and mentally and everything else.
Mhm.
And I love the idea that we get these different versions of you and your mom. But I
Mhm.
think that's how grief works, right? Like it's always evolving, it's always shifting on the page. I mean, if I pick up Seeing the Body in 2 years and reread it then, I don't know. I mean, I will remember having enjoyed it before, but like, I don't know where my life's going to be in 2 years and what that's going to mean when I pick it up. And so reading Flower Bearers feels like you're giving us that experience where you're like, I'm going to write a thing. And in some places, it's going to fold back on itself. And I'm going to dip back into my history. And then we're going to bop forward a little bit because that's actually how life and grief and memory work.
It's always tessellating,
Mm, mm,
after writing The Flower Bearers, after my husband published his memoir,
hmm.
I had to start on such a deliberate healing journey of a
Right,
team of therapists to put my whole life, my body,
right.
everything back together. I don't know, speaking to you today, if I could actually write the Flower Bearers again. I don't think I could, because I
Yeah.
leapt ahead,
Hmm.
actually saved my life. My body started shutting down not long after finishing this. And I thought,
Right.
oh, this can kill me. I can have a heart attack very easily in my
Right.
40s or a stroke. And
Hmm.
so, I look at the Flower Bearers, I look at the version of myself that had to write it.
Hmm.
And I have so much compassion and admiration for
Hmm.
her, because I don't know if I'd allow myself to go there now. Um,
Hmm.
when I read Seeing the Body, there is still some immediate moments, and I'm glad, I'm like, oh, it's on the record. It's here
Hmm.
in memory. As the memory changes and it turns and I evolve, all of these things will evolve,
Hmm.
including memory. It changes and shifts, and
Hmm.
certain things that seem grainy right now, in five
Hmm.
years, they will sharply arrive. And I'll
Hmm.
be like,
Hmm.
oh my gosh. And I think that's the beautiful thing when you talk about the reading process.
Yeah.
There's certain books I try to read every year, a lot of James Baldwin and
Yep.
Toni Morrison and Deborah Levy, and there's just all kinds of people. And
Hmm.
so I'm like, oh, I'm not even the same woman now
Yeah.
reading this book.
Yeah.
Reading Virginia Woolf now is not how, when I was in grad school, I
Oh
appreciated
no.
Virginia Woolf. It's really different. Me and Virginia is different.
Yep.
So, I love that, because that means there's a space where you can come home over and over in a book. You can
Hmm.
come home and find all these parts of yourself there and marvel at that, and at the same time challenge and question and expand.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
think that's lovely. I think I must have like 6 or 7 copies of Sula with different notes. And when I look at the
Yep.
notes of what I paid attention to, I'm like, oh wow, what was going on in my life, or this is what I was
Hmm.
underlining and writing notes about in this book, versus the book I bought, because I date them, like the book that
Hmm.
I bought 3 years later of the same book.
Hmm.
I love that process. I think it's wonderful with books.
I dog ear, I write
Yeah.
in the margin. I do all of those things. And I know there are people who think I'm a complete barbarian for doing the dog earing thing, and I will not apologize for it. I just won't, because to me, a book is a living, breathing thing, right? Like, yes, it exists in its own orbit, but every single book is in conversation with the reader. And we bring our own experience to whatever it is. And I'm having a moment too. You have a very charming, we need to bring a little laughter in for a second. There's a moment where your dad is meeting your now husband before you were married, and your dad says, "Oh, he writes books. Can I find them at Barnes and Noble?" And I'm sorry, when there, I'm sure there are listeners who know who your husband is, and we're going to get there in a second, because also you have one of the cutest the meet cute story behind you too. It still entertains me to no end. But when I saw that line from your dad, I was like, "Yep, go dad." Go dad. This is awesome. Um, you met your husband when he basically walked into a plate glass door. I mean, I'm summarizing it, but I'm going to ask you to tell the story, because it does bring us to another piece of your story. But I do, I think it's something that not a lot of folks who recognize his name might know. And I just, it wasn't a story I was expecting. And of course, I've heard it a couple of times now. So can I ask you to tell the story of how you met?
I'm so happy to tell you the story of how we met. We met in May. It was a spring night, and there was a pen
Hmm.
event,
Yep.
and I was there as a poet, and
Hmm.
we had the event, which I
Hmm.
fast forwarding. We had the event, and there was a after party reception
Hmm.
that Penn was throwing at the Standard,
Hmm.
just across the street, and so there was a vigil. And there was this night, it was, Black Lives Matter signs, and all of this was going on. And we do have a photo of us holding a candle out front of Cooper Union together.
Right. Right.
And then we went across the street, and I kind of went my way, and didn't really think about it too much. There was like a little energy in the green room for the Penn event.
Right.
Maybe it was because he was asking where the wine was, and there was coconut water being served. And I thought, oh, this guy. But anyway, when I got up to the rooftop, and it was like this kind of beginning of spring, that time in New
Hmm.
York where we're all kind of like peeling off
Oh
clothes,
yeah.
where it's like feeling mild, and people are
Hmm.
slowing down and aren't so like agitated. And so he approached me, and he was like, hi, I'm Salman. And like, I didn't know who he was. And then he started saying something about the New York skyline. And I was like, yeah, whatever. Okay. So then he was just like, well, let's go out and like, I
Right.
can show you this part of the skyline or something, the view, the rooftop view. And I was like, all right, let me see this rooftop that I've seen in like 20 years here, but okay. So I went ahead
Yep.
through an open very thickly plated piece of glass.
Mm-hmm.
So there were some of the doors that were open and some of them
Mm-hmm.
not. And so I went through the door and then I looked back. He
Mm-hmm.
is not going through the same door.
No.
What he is doing is hitting at full momentum a
Mm-hmm.
very thick piece of plated glass.
Right.
He hit it and repelled off of it, rolled to the ground.
Mm-hmm.
He looked up. The pen staff was like, Salman Rushdie's on the ground. They were all around. I ran back. He's got like blood coming down his nose.
Oh.
There's a big thing on his head. His glasses. It was like a mess. And I thought, oh my gosh, he's going to pass out. Like he was
Mm-hmm.
so out of it and he was so embarrassed. And then
Right.
he's like, will you have a drink with me? And I was like, oh my God.
Yep.
Okay. I need to get you out of here. They helped him up. I think he was really shaken up. This big
Mm.
knot was coming out of his head. And I was just like, maybe we need to get you some ice. And he was
Mm-hmm.
like, I got to get out of here. And I was like, okay. And he kind of literally saw stars. He was like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
dizzy. I'm seeing spots. And I'm like, let's get in a cab. You're not in
Mm-hmm.
the shape for the after party.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of how we met. So he
Right.
literally will say he saw stars, but he doesn't say the part of the collision that happened. I'm surprised this place didn't send us an invoice for shattered glass because he hit it
Well,
hard. And then he like rolled a little. And I was like, oh my God. And I thought, I hope nothing happens to him. How could this happen? So that's our kind of neat cute where I was like, all right, so let me talk to you a little bit. And then it progressed from there.
right.
Wasn't very
And
literary, wasn't
yeah,
very
it's not very literary, but it really is very human. And I think, obviously his reputation precedes him in many ways, and there are people who have big feelings about what he's done and what it. I will say Midnight's Children is a book that I hold close and always have, but at the same time, I kind of like the idea of this New York dude bopping into a glass door because a pretty girl talked to him. I mean,
yeah,
I'm sorry, like it's
really.
just a great story. I'm
Yeah.
glad he's fine, and I'm glad it wasn't
It
worse.
worked
But
out for him.
it really did. Yeah, it really did. But also, if you've read Knife, you cover some of that as well. And I mean, you hadn't been married very, very long when the attack happened.
Less than a year.
Okay.
Less.
And I don't think we have to go into a lot of detail here. I feel like it's very much a part of the public record, but the way this piece of the story, and Sophia Sinclair, who's also a poet and a memoirist who I quite love, she's a dear friend of yours. She features in a lot of this piece of the story as well. But here you are, and you're moving from sort of place to place on a spectrum of grief.
Mhm. Mhm.
There is no control. And yet you do ultimately get through to the other side in a good
Mhm.
way.
Mhm. Mhm.
And, your husband can be out in the world and doing things and has,
Mhm.
published 2 books since. And I'm sure there are many more to come. But to have to process your personal, all of the pieces that came before were yours and yours alone because your profile was different.
Mhm. Yes.
Now you have people laying claim to your story because your husband's profile is his profile. I mean,
Mhm. Mhm.
and yet what I love in the Flower Bearers is your voice doesn't change. It's very steady. It's very much like, okay, this is what happened. By the way, this was a little gross. Um, ugh, hmm. There were a couple of moments where I was like, this is why med school was not in my future ever. Um, but again, too, like now that you've been able to process to whatever extent an event like that,
Mhm. Mhm.
do you feel like now you have a better understanding of what you went through in those moments? Because obviously, when there's a huge traumatic thing happening, you can't process what's happening. You just have to get through minute by minute by minute,
Mhm.
and you don't have a way to say what is happening, where are we going, what's
You don't have time to kind of have a little
right.
narrative in your head or here's the story. You're in survivor mode.
Yeah.
I don't even think I was in survivor mode. There was
Okay.
something before survivor mode
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, that was happening. I think some people who did read my husband's memoir
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't have known that by the time the attack happened, I was still kind of on the floor from
Right.
having lost my closest friend of
Right.
70 years. And so
Right.
then within a short amount of time, months,
Mm-hmm.
there was now this kind of compounded trauma where
Mm-hmm.
suddenly the grief journey, however slow it was at that point, just had to be completely shelved because I had to focus on the person who was fighting to live and survive. It was also a moment suddenly where because I am quite private, even though I've
Mm-hmm.
written this very raw, provocative memoir, I'm
Right.
still very private. And
Mm-hmm.
so suddenly there was an announcement, oh, hey, everyone, he's married to this person. That
Right.
wasn't even really on the radar because I didn't want that. Didn't
Right.
want that.
Right.
Suddenly I didn't have a choice. And I think there's certain things in these kinds of situations too, where a lot of the things happening, you don't have a choice. You
Mm-hmm.
have to learn to say what is within your control and what is really not on you and is not in your control because your brain wants to wire you to make sense and have
Mm-hmm.
control. And you're not even in flight mode, you're in fight mode. You're
Right.
just fighting. And I feel, with the duality of the events is one of the primary reasons the flower bearers exist. If
Mm-hmm.
it
Mm-hmm.
had been one event, perhaps I would have written poems or made visual work.
Right.
I don't think I would have turned to the genre of memoir
Right.
because I would
Right.
have said, well, my husband has written a memoir about what happened, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to keep doing whatever I want to do or whatever
Mm-hmm.
I want to do. So that really shifted. But I also have to say, and I could see it while I was writing The Flower Bears, all of the experiences of my mother watching and witnessing her in the hospital prepared
Mm-hmm.
me in ways I didn't even know. It was so
Mm-hmm.
unconscious of you're in the trauma ward and this is how hospitals remember this.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, it hasn't changed much actually. You've
Mm-hmm.
got to get this together. You don't have time. Like
Mm-hmm.
you're on. You don't have time to, and you're going to mess up and you're not going to know everything, but you're
Mm-hmm.
going to try to do the best you can because who could do anything in this
Right.
kind of situation? There's no map. There's no like, well, what did so and so do when this happened? Or what did this, that's not available.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really trying. I've never fought so hard in my life on a number of fronts at the same time. Um, and so I now, as I think about that time and look
Mm-hmm.
back at it, even to say a one sentence of what the flower bearers is about, or
Mm-hmm.
to look and say, look at that woman. Oh my
Mm-hmm.
gosh,
Mm-hmm.
and not to go into another category, but there's a film coming out. And when I look at myself, when I look
Mm-hmm.
at, and I write about it in the Flower Bears, when I look at the
Yep.
fact that the camera came,
Right.
that was like a pair of lungs for me that helped
Mm-hmm.
me breathe. And so
Mm-hmm.
you can still make something, Rachel Eliza. You can still have
Mm-hmm.
a voice visually, even though you cannot
Mm-hmm.
speak. And so to look now at the narrative, at the story, and just say, I don't even know how you survived that. Who,
Right.
who, I have grace for myself and compassion for myself, but I don't think I could live through something like that ever
Right.
again. And I hope I wouldn't want it for anybody.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want it for anybody to have to deal
Mm-hmm.
with that level of trauma and
Mm-hmm.
duress and grief and literally suffering and pain and fear and anxiety and the violence of it. I will never come to terms with that. Never.
Well,
I
I
will
don't
never have
think you
closure.
should be asked to. This is part of it
Yeah.
for me. Like we have this idea that you're supposed to get closure, and yes, those were air quotes you just heard me say. Um, to me, closure doesn't exist. I mean, we continue to evolve, right? Language evolves, culture evolves, art evolves. Like we as humans in the world, like we evolve and we the way we interact with each other, the way we interact with our art or our culture, our society, what have you. This idea that pat, you wake up one day and everything is fixed. I'm like, well, no.
No, and I
No.
think it's parts of the journey that like there can be a closing. There can be
Hmm.
something like, well, this
Hmm.
seam is fixed now, or I've
Hmm.
stitched this.
Hmm.
I'm going to leave this here. But knowing that it can be unraveled and unstitched at any time. And that is something I have been learning because things will trigger me, especially things I don't anticipate.
Yeah.
But now I'm a bit more discerning. I'm like, oh, yeah, that complex PTSD you have is not going away.
Right.
Certain moments you don't know suddenly why your body, your breathing, your sleep, or something has now put you on alert. And you have
Hmm.
to do that
Hmm.
work within yourself to say, let me check in here. Let me
Hmm.
relieve myself from this environment. Let me do the breath work. Do I need a
Hmm.
sound bath? Do I just need to sit at home and watch Law and Order and,
Right.
order, Grubhub? And I'm just
Hmm.
not available. I can't be
Yeah.
around people, and that's okay. I don't have to feel
Hmm.
ashamed about it.
Hmm.
But there's not for me the kind of there's closure on certain aspects or maybe
Hmm.
chapters within that kind of
Hmm.
grief, but they seep into other spaces.
Hmm.
It really seeps into other spaces. But I'm trying to focus on the love seeping into other spaces and the self-love and having
Hmm.
more and saying when I wake up, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful because that's how I feel. Because I was waking up for a few years and I thought, I'm in a nightmare. I don't even, if I
Right.
go to sleep, I might not wake up.
Right.
I can't believe this is my life. How did this happen? And it's happening.
Right.
And just get up and exist, like do
Hmm.
something. And so it's really, you have to be very deliberate in your joy. You have to be very deliberate in your self-care,
Hmm.
and your imagination has to really just unloose it because anything can be possible once you've come out of this kind of space. And that's where I'm at now. Like anything can be possible for me.
Hmm.
I don't have to be despairing. I don't have to be pessimistic. I don't have to be violent. I don't have to be, traumatized, even though I am, but like I don't have to accept that as that's what's going to define me. And I think too in the memoir I write about, I'm defining me.
Hmm.
It's not about my proximity to my husband's story
Hmm.
or to someone else's story or their understanding of who they think I am.
Hmm.
I'm in progress and I'm trying to
Yeah.
figure things out and appreciate so many positive people and stories and experiences, the people who have gone through harder things than me. But there's
Right.
no scale, there's no
Hmm.
comparison. It's just more humanity. And I love that. There's just more humanity for some of us.
And maybe we can teach some other folks while we're at it. Maybe.
We'll
Maybe.
see.
Um, have you started the next thing? Have you started a follow-up project? I mean, that is kind of the rule of thumb, right? You finish a book and something should be on the burner while you're thinking about it. Has that been your experience?
I've been really excited about my photography.
Okay, good.
I felt like I had to get through the memoir
Okay.
and then just say, you know what? It's time to dive into images. You've been a photographer now for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
time to like kind of come out, as Diana Ross sings, like I'm coming out. So I'm into that mode. And
Excellent.
I love it. I love spending time looking at images, going to galleries and just opening up books, old photograph books, and looking at my old film
Mm-hmm.
negatives and just being like, look at what you were doing for yourself. Look how much you cared,
Mm-hmm.
keep going with this, So I'm really kind of into my photography. I'm painting. I'm just, out there. And I'm just glad to be out there.
Mm-hmm.
I write poems from time to time, but I don't have the pressure on myself because the flower bears, I gave it a lot
Mm-hmm.
and I'm
Mm-hmm.
regenerating now almost. I feel like I've got to regenerate. I've got to kind of be dormant and like
Mm-hmm.
relax for a moment. So I'm learning how to dance ballet. I'm just kind of just experimenting with coming back into the
Mm-hmm.
world in a way
Yeah.
because the grief really isolated me and the trauma and different aspects of how my life has now had to recalibrate because of these past
Mm-hmm.
years. That's still a learning curve. I don't have that
Mm-hmm.
figured out. So, I it's the way I live that I really love now. where there's just awe and curiosity and like adventure. Like, let's just check something out. Let's just go for it. Why not? You know? And maybe I was a little bit more reserved before, not that much reserved, but like that also connects me back to Aisha. Like, we just go check stuff out, just see it. Like, we'll come away, just something will happen. Maybe 20 years later, 5 years later, it'll be in a poem, something I saw, but like, I want to see it.
And I'm really glad we get to see it with you, whether it's the poetry or the photographs or the film or the memoir or the novel. I'm just really excited. Rachel Eliza, I'm so happy we got to do this. Thank you so much for making the time. Thank you for writing all of the work. But seeing the body, that is it. Once you finish the flower bearers, pick up Seeing the Body. I promise the two in conversation are just, it's magic. And I'm so happy we got to do this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Miwa. I really enjoyed this with you today.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.